I watched through my kitchen window as 3 dump trucks rolled past my property line at 6 in the morning, and my blood ran cold when I realized they were heading straight toward the old iron gates marking my family cemetery. My name is James Nolan, and I have lived on my ancestral property in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania for 37 years. The land itself has been in my family since 1823, passed down through 7 generations. My great-great-great-grandfather built the original farmhouse, and behind it, nestled among ancient oak trees, sits a small family cemetery where 23 of my ancestors rest. The cemetery predates the Civil War, with headstones dating back nearly 200 years. It is sacred ground, protected by state law, and marked clearly with wrought iron fencing and a historical preservation plaque installed by the county in 1976. 3 months earlier, my quiet life had been disrupted when developers bought up the surrounding farmland and built a massive planned community called Meadowbrook Estates. I'd refused to sell my 10 acres, which now sat like an island surrounded by cookie-cutter homes with beige siding and identical mailboxes. The developer had not been happy, but my property was mine, paid off decades ago, and no amount of money could convince me to abandon the land where my father, grandfather, and their fathers before them were buried. The Homeowners Association formed immediately after the first families moved in. Within weeks, I started receiving letters. The HOA president, a woman named Karen Caldwell, had introduced herself by showing up at my door with a clipboard and a smile that did not reach her eyes. She was probably 55, with severely highlighted blonde hair cut in that aggressive bob that screamed middle management, and she wore a pantsuit despite it being a Saturday afternoon. Mr. Nolan, I'm here to discuss bringing your property into compliance with our community standards, she had said, not bothering with pleasantries. My property is not part of your community, I replied, keeping my hand on the door frame. Actually, according to our development agreement with the county, all properties within the Meadowbrook boundaries are subject to HOA regulations. She flipped through papers on her clipboard. Your fence is not regulation height, your grass exceeds the 2-inch maximum, and that cemetery is not listed as an approved structure. That cemetery has been there for 200 years. It is registered with the county and protected under Pennsylvania state law. And I never signed anything agreeing to join your HOA. Her smile had vanished. We'll see about that, Mr. Nolan. That conversation happened in February. Now it was May, and those dump trucks were rolling past my house toward my family's graves. I grabbed my phone and my keys and ran outside, my coffee mug forgotten on the counter. My boots pounded against the gravel driveway as I sprinted toward the cemetery. The morning air was cool, and dew still clung to the grass. Birds scattered from the oak trees as I approached, and then I saw it. A paving crew had already set up equipment. Orange cones marked out a massive rectangle that encompassed not just the area around the cemetery, but the cemetery itself. A bulldozer sat idling 30 feet from my great-grandfather's headstone. 2 men in hard hats were unrolling plans on a folding table, and standing there, directing them with pointed fingers and that same cold smile, was Karen Caldwell. "What the hell do you think you were doing?" I shouted, running up to the work site. Karen turned to me with manufactured surprise. "Oh, Mr. Nolan, good morning. We are installing the community parking lot as approved by the County Planning Commission." "That is a cemetery. You cannot pave over a cemetery." "Our permits are in order." She gestured to one of the workers, who handed her a manila folder. "The county approved our parking lot expansion on this land. This is my land. This is my family cemetery. Actually, Mr. Nolan, if you had read the letters we sent you, you would know that the HOA board discovered this property was incorrectly surveyed in 1968. The cemetery sits on community land, not your personal property. We have the corrected survey right here." She thrust papers at me. My hands shook as I looked at them. Someone had drawn new property lines that cut my 10 acres down to 8, conveniently placing the cemetery just outside my boundary. It was absurd, obviously fraudulent, but the documents looked official, complete with county stamps and signatures. "This is forgery," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You will not touch those graves." "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back behind the work zone," one of the construction workers said, approaching me with his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I am not going anywhere. My great-great-great-grandfather is buried right there." I pointed at the oldest headstone, a weathered granite marker with barely legible text. My grandmother is buried there. My father, who died 18 months ago, is buried there. You are not paving over them. Karen's expression hardened. You are interfering with permitted construction work. Bob, call the police and report a trespasser. I am on my property, you psychotic woman. Actually, you are standing in what is now community space. You have exactly 60 seconds to remove yourself before we press charges. The construction worker named Bob was already on his phone. I realized with sick clarity that Karen had planned this perfectly. She had fake documents, county permits somehow obtained through deception or bribery, and now she was manufacturing a trespassing charge to have me removed from the scene. Once the police escorted me away, these crews would start paving, and by the time I could get a lawyer or file an emergency injunction, my family's graves would be under 3 inches of asphalt. My mind raced. I could not let them remove me. I walked straight to the bulldozer and climbed into the driver's seat. Sir, get down from there, Bob shouted. Nobody is operating this machine, I called back. Not while I am sitting in it. Karen's face flushed red. That is destruction of property. That is theft. I am not destroying anything. I am sitting, and I will sit here until you people get off my land. A crowd was gathering. Residents of Meadowbrook Estates were emerging from their identical homes, walking over in their bathrobes and pajamas to see what the commotion was about. I saw phones coming out, people filming. Good. Let them record this insanity. The police arrived within 10 minutes. 2 officers from the Lancaster County Police Department parked their cruiser at the edge of the construction zone and approached cautiously. I recognized one of them, Officer Martinez, who I had met at community events over the years. James, what's going on here? Martinez called up to me. They are trying to pave over my family cemetery, Dave. They forged property documents and got fraudulent permits. Karen immediately inserted herself into the conversation. Officer, this man is interfering with permitted construction and has stolen construction equipment. We need him removed immediately. Martinez looked at her, then at me, then at the cemetery with its obvious historical markers. Madam, is that a cemetery? It is on community property, and we have approval to build here. Can I see your permits? Karen handed over her folder. Martinez studied the documents, his partner looking over his shoulder. They conferred quietly. I stayed in the bulldozer seat, my heart hammering. Finally, Martinez walked back toward me. James, I'm going to need you to come down from there. Dave, they forged property documents. That cemetery has been in my family for 200 years. It is registered with the county. There is a historical preservation designation. You cannot let them do this. I understand, but you cannot occupy construction equipment. Come down, and we will sort this out properly. If I come down, they will start paving the moment you leave. Martinez sighed. He was a good man, and I could see the conflict on his face. I am trying to help you, but you are putting me in a bad position. If you do not come down, I have to arrest you. Karen's smile was triumphant. I climbed down from the bulldozer. Martinez did not handcuff me, which I appreciated. His partner took statements from Karen and the construction crew while Martinez walked me aside. What is really happening here, James? I explained everything. The HOA's harassment, the suspicious property survey, the fact that I never signed any agreement making my land subject to their rules. Martinez listened, taking notes. This is a civil matter, he finally said. Property disputes, HOA issues, that is all civil court. I cannot stop them from working if they have county permits. Those permits are based on fraudulent documents. Then you need to take that to a judge, file an emergency injunction, get a lawyer, challenge the survey. But I cannot make that call standing here. By the time any court hears this, my family's graves will be under a parking lot. Martinez looked genuinely sympathetic. I'm sorry, James. My hands are tied. The best I can do is advise them to proceed cautiously given the dispute, but if their paperwork is in order, I cannot stop permitted work. He walked back to Karen and spoke with her. I heard him saying something about exercising caution and potential liability, but Karen just nodded with that infuriating smile. The officers left. The construction crew looked at me warily, but Karen waved them forward. You heard the police. We have every right to be here. Now, Mr. Nolan, I suggest you go back to your house before we file a restraining order. I stood there, fists clenched, watching as the bulldozer operator climbed back into his machine. The engine roared to life. He began lowering the blade. Then something inside me broke. Or maybe it crystallized. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. "County Clerk's office," a pleasant voice answered. I need to speak with Judge William Harris. It is an emergency regarding a historical cemetery desecration." "Sir, the judge is not available without an appointment. Tell him James Nolan is calling about the Nolan family cemetery on Old Mill Road. Tell him they are paving over it right now. He will want to know." There was a pause. "Please hold." Judge Harris and my father had been close friends, serving together on various county historical committees. The judge had given the eulogy at my father's funeral, standing beside his grave in that very cemetery. If anyone in the county system would care about this, it was him. "James," the judge's voice came on the line, "what is happening?" I explained the situation in rapid-fire sentences. The HOA, the fake survey, the fraudulent permits, the bulldozer 30 feet from my father's grave. "They cannot do that," Harris said, his voice hard. "That cemetery has historic designation. Any work within 100 feet requires approval from the Historical Preservation Board. Who issued these permits?" "I do not know. They have county stamps on them." "I am coming there right now. Do not let them touch those graves. I do not care what you have to do, James. Stall them." He hung up. I looked at the bulldozer, which was now scraping away topsoil at the edge of the marked zone, maybe 20 feet from the nearest headstone. Karen was directing the dump trucks into position. I walked straight into the cemetery, past the iron gates, and stood directly in front of my father's grave. The black granite headstone bore his name, Robert James Nolan, 1944-2024, beloved father and grandfather. "Sir, you need to move," the bulldozer operator called out. I shook my head and sat down on the ground, crossing my legs, my hand resting on my father's headstone. Karen marched over, her heels sinking into the soft earth. "Mr. Nolan, this is your final warning. Move, or we will have you arrested for trespassing and obstruction." "Call the police again," I said calmly. "Call them. But I am not moving, and any machine that comes near these graves goes through me first." Her face contorted with rage. "You are insane. This is community property. This is my family, and you will have to kill me before I let you desecrate their graves." Some of the gathered residents were murmuring now. A woman I did not recognize called out, "Maybe we should wait until this is sorted out legally?" Karen whirled on her. "This is legal. We have all the proper documentation. This man is a squatter on community land." "He is sitting on graves," someone else said. "That seems weird to pave over." "The cemetery will be relocated," Karen snapped. "We will move the remains to a proper municipal cemetery. That is in the approved plan." "You will not touch my family's remains," I shouted. "These people have rested here for 200 years. This is consecrated ground." A pickup truck came roaring up the road, kicking up dust. Judge William Harris emerged, still wearing his judicial robes from morning court. He was 72 years old, tall and lean, with iron gray hair and the bearing of a man accustomed to commanding respect. Behind him came a sedan carrying two people I recognized from the County Historical Society. "What in God's name is happening here?" Judge Harris thundered, his voice carrying across the worksite. Karen's confidence faltered for just a moment, but she recovered. "Your Honor, this is a private HOA matter. We have all proper permits for construction." "You have permits to build on historically designated cemetery land?" "The land designation was incorrect. We have a corrected survey showing, 'Show me everything, right now.'" Karen handed over her folder. Judge Harris flipped through it, his expression growing darker with each page. The two Historical Society representatives examined the cemetery itself, checking the preservation plaque, studying the headstones, taking photographs. "This survey is dated 3 weeks ago," Judge Harris said slowly. "It claims to be a correction of a 1968 survey error. Who requested this correction?" "The HOA board discovered the discrepancy during our property review," Karen said. "And who performed the survey?" She provided a name. Judge Harris pulled out his phone and made a call. His conversation was brief and pointed. When he hung up, his jaw was tight. "The surveyor you listed says he never performed any work on this property. His license number was used without permission." Karen's face went pale. That's impossible. We received those documents from the county planning office. Which clerk? I would need to check our records. You do that. Judge Harris turned to the construction crew. All work stops immediately. This is now a legal investigation. Any equipment that moves 1 inch closer to this cemetery will result in criminal charges. The bulldozer operator shut off his engine immediately. The dump truck drivers stayed in their cabs but made no move to proceed. Your Honor, you cannot simply override county permits, Karen protested. I absolutely can when those permits were obtained through fraudulent documents. This cemetery is protected under Pennsylvania state law, specifically the Historical Burial Grounds Preservation Act. Any work within 100 feet requires approval from the County Historical Preservation Board. Was that approval obtained? Silence. I will take that as a no, Judge Harris continued. Furthermore, any alteration to property boundaries affecting historically designated land requires public notice and a hearing. Was a hearing held? More silence. One of the Historical Society representatives, a woman named Margaret Chen, approached us. Judge Harris, I have checked our records. No application was filed regarding this property. If someone in the planning office issued permits, they did so without consulting the Preservation Board as required by law. Judge Harris looked at Karen Caldwell with undisguised contempt. Mrs. Caldwell, you and your HOA board have committed several serious crimes here. Forgery of official documents, fraud, attempted desecration of a protected burial site, unauthorized use of a licensed surveyor's credentials. I strongly suggest you contact a lawyer. We were acting on advice from our HOA attorney, Karen sputtered. We did everything by the book. Then your attorney is either incompetent or complicit. Either way, this ends now. He turned to me. James, I am issuing an emergency protection order for this property. Nothing happens here without a full court hearing. We will sort out who falsified what documents and how permits were issued improperly. I stood up from my father's grave, my legs stiff from sitting on the cold ground. Relief flooded through me, making me dizzy. Thank you, Bill. Your father would have done the same for me. This is an outrage. He looked at the gathered crowd of Meadowbrook Estates residents. Let me be clear to everyone here. This cemetery predates your community by nearly 2 centuries. It is protected by multiple state and county laws. Anyone who attempts to disturb it will face criminal prosecution. If your HOA board told you otherwise, they lied to you. Several residents looked shocked, others looked angry, but I could not tell if the anger was directed at me or at their HOA leadership. Karen was frantically typing on her phone, presumably calling her lawyer or other board members. Judge Harris made several more calls, including one to the county sheriff's office. Within an hour, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived and began taking formal statements. The construction crew packed up their equipment. Karen and 2 other HOA board members I had not met before were told to report to the county courthouse the following morning for questioning. As the sun climbed higher and the crowd dispersed, Margaret Chen from the Historical Society approached me. Mr. Nolan, I apologize that our office did not catch this sooner. Someone clearly exploited gaps in the system. How did they get county stamps on fake documents? That is what we need to find out. Either they counterfeited the stamps, which is a federal crime, or someone in the county offices was bribed or coerced into providing them. The judge has already ordered an internal investigation. By early afternoon, the worksite was completely cleared. The orange cones were gone, the equipment removed. Only some torn-up earth at the edge of the cemetery remained as evidence of how close they had come to destroying my family's graves. I walked among the headstones, checking each one. They were all intact, undisturbed. My father's grave looked exactly as it had that morning. I knelt beside it, my hand on the cool granite. "We are okay, Dad," I whispered. "They did not get you." Over the next few days, the story exploded. Local news picked it up first. HOA attempts to pave over historical cemetery. Then regional news, and eventually it hit social media, where it went viral. The image of me sitting in front of my father's grave while a bulldozer idled nearby became a symbol of HOA overreach and corporate development destroying history. The investigation moved quickly. Judge Harris was personally motivated, and he had the authority to cut through bureaucratic delays. What emerged was a story of systematic fraud. Karen Caldwell and two other HOA board members, a man named Richard Sullivan and a woman named Patricia Morgan, had hired an attorney who specialized in aggressive HOA enforcement. This attorney, whose name was Douglas Ventura, had a history of bending rules to expand HOA authority. He had advised them that they could claim the cemetery land if they could create documentation showing it was outside my property boundaries. Ventura had connections with a low-level clerk in the county planning office, a man named Tommy Breslin, who was drowning in gambling debts. Breslin had accepted $5,000 to create the fake survey documents and stamp them with official county seals. He had also issued the construction permits without routing them through the proper channels, including the Historical Preservation Board. The surveyor, whose name and license number were used, had no knowledge of any of this. His credentials had simply been stolen from public records. When confronted with evidence, Tommy Breslin broke down and confessed everything. He provided emails, bank records showing the payment, and text messages with Douglas Ventura. The attorney was arrested at his office in downtown Lancaster. Karen Caldwell, Richard Sullivan, and Patricia Morgan were all charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, and attempted desecration of a burial ground. I attended the preliminary hearing 3 weeks after the incident. The courthouse was packed with residents from Meadowbrook Estates, media, and members of various historical preservation groups who wanted to see justice served. Douglas Ventura arrived in an expensive suit with an even more expensive lawyer. He maintained that he had believed the documents were legitimate, that he had been assured by Breslin that everything was properly authorized. His lawyer argued that Ventura was the victim of a rogue government employee. But the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Diana Torres, systematically destroyed that defense. She presented emails where Ventura explicitly instructed Breslin on what documents to create. She showed text messages where Ventura discussed getting around the preservation board. She brought in testimony from other HOAs that Ventura had represented, revealing a pattern of fraudulent document creation and legal intimidation. Karen Caldwell's defense was even weaker. She claimed she had simply trusted her attorney's advice, but Torres produced HOA board meeting minutes where Karen had discussed removing the eyesore cemetery and dealing with the Nolan problem permanently. Other board members testified that Karen had been obsessed with acquiring my property, viewing it as a personal insult that I refused to join the HOA or sell my land. Richard Sullivan and Patricia Morgan both took plea deals, agreeing to testify against Karen and Ventura in exchange for reduced charges. The trial itself took place in August. I testified about the morning I saw the dump trucks, about Karen's confrontation with me, about sitting on my father's grave prepared to be arrested or worse. Judge Harris testified about the protection laws and the proper procedures that were completely ignored. Margaret Chen explained the historical significance of the cemetery. Tommy Breslin, looking haggard and remorseful, detailed exactly how he had been paid to create fake documents. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Douglas Ventura was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Karen Caldwell was convicted of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted desecration of a protected burial site. The sentencing hearing in September was cathartic. Douglas Ventura received 5 years in federal prison and was permanently disbarred. Karen Caldwell received 3 years in state prison and was ordered to pay substantial restitution. Tommy Breslin, because of his cooperation, received 2 years in probation. But the story did not end with the criminal cases. The publicity surrounding the case had opened up a Pandora's box regarding Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Other residents came forward with complaints about harassment, improper fines, and intimidation tactics. The state attorney general's office launched an investigation into HOA practices statewide, using Meadowbrook as a case study. I received dozens of calls and emails from other people who had faced similar situations with aggressive HOAs. Some had lost their homes over minor violations. Others had been bullied into expensive compliance upgrades. The story tapped into a deep well of frustration with HOA overreach. A local journalist named Rachel Kim wrote a series of articles about HOAs in Pennsylvania, examining how they had evolved from simple neighborhood organizations into quasi-governmental bodies with enormous power but little oversight. Her reporting won a state journalism award and helped prompt legislative reform. As for me, I just wanted peace. After the trials concluded, I hired a surveying company to perform a comprehensive, certified survey of my entire property. The results confirmed what I had always known. The cemetery sat squarely on my land, about 50 feet from the western property line. The county officially recorded this survey, and Judge Harris had it sealed with multiple legal protections to prevent any future challenges. I also had a new fence installed around the cemetery, this one with a gate that locked. I commissioned a stone mason to create a large memorial marker at the entrance, listing all 23 family members buried there, along with a brief history of the Nolan family's presence in Lancaster County since 1823. The Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, dissolved 6 months after Karen's conviction. Too many residents had lost faith in the organization, and the legal bills from the criminal cases had drained the HOA's finances. The neighborhood still existed, of course, but without the mandatory HOA structure. People maintained their properties or did not, according to their own preferences and county regulations. Some of my neighbors from Meadowbrook actually became friends. A couple named Daniel and Lisa Warner lived in one of the houses closest to my property. They had 2 young children who were fascinated by the old cemetery. With permission, I let them visit sometimes, and I told them stories about my ancestors. Daniel helped me maintain the grounds, and Lisa, who was a genealogist, helped me research and document my family history more thoroughly. The negative attention from the case made the development less desirable, and property values in Meadowbrook dropped. Some residents moved away. Others doubled down on making it a real community rather than just a collection of identical houses with an oppressive HOA. Neighborhood barbecues replaced violation notices. Block parties replaced compliance committees. In October, a year after the paving incident, the county held a ceremony at my family cemetery. They installed an expanded historical marker, officially designating it as a protected heritage site. Judge Harris spoke about the importance of preserving local history. Margaret Chen discussed the cemetery's place in Lancaster County's development, and I talked about my father, my grandfather, and all the Nolans who had worked this land and built their lives here. Maybe 50 people attended, including school groups studying local history. Standing there among the graves of my ancestors, surrounded by people who had come to honor their memory, I felt something I had not felt in a long time: pride and peace. The old oak trees that shaded the cemetery had been there longer than any of us. They would outlast the Meadowbrook development, would probably outlast the roads and houses being built across the county. My family had planted some of those oaks 200 years ago, and their roots ran deep, tangling with the bones of my ancestors in the earth. Karen Caldwell served 20 months of her 3-year sentence before being released on parole. I heard through the local grapevine that she moved to Ohio, where, presumably, no one knew her as the woman who tried to pave over a cemetery. Douglas Ventura remained in federal prison. His law practice was liquidated to pay restitution to the various people and HOAs he had defrauded over the years. The following spring, I decided to restore more of my property. The old farmhouse my great-great-great-grandfather had built was still structurally sound, but needed work. I hired contractors to repair the roof, restore the original wood floors, and update the plumbing and electrical systems while maintaining the historical character. I also cleared several acres that had become overgrown and planted new crops, nothing commercial, just a large vegetable garden and some apple trees. My father had always talked about bringing the land back into active use, and I figured it was time to honor that wish. My son, Jeremy, who lived in Philadelphia and worked in finance, started visiting more often. He brought his wife and my 2 granddaughters, aged 8 and 6. The girls loved exploring the property, climbing the oak trees, and listening to family stories. Jeremy and I worked together to create a family history book, compiling old photographs, documents, and oral histories. "You know, Dad," Jeremy said one afternoon as we sat on the farmhouse porch, watching his daughters play in the yard, "when this whole thing happened, I thought you were crazy, sitting in front of a bulldozer. I was ready to bail you out of jail." "I was ready to go to jail," I admitted. "I was not letting them touch those graves. I get it now. This place, This history, it matters. I want my daughters to know where they come from." He paused. "When I was younger, I could not wait to leave. The city seemed so much more exciting than this old farm. But now, with kids, I think about legacy differently. Your grandfather used to say that land connects us to time in a way nothing else can. Standing here, we are touching the same earth our ancestors touched. That matters." "It does." Jeremy looked toward the cemetery, visible through the trees. "Thanks for fighting for it, Dad. For real." In June, I received an unexpected call from a documentary filmmaker based in Pittsburgh. She was creating a film about HOA abuses and wanted to feature my story. I was hesitant at first, but she explained that my case had become a touchstone in the debate about HOA reform, and she wanted to explore why. I agreed to participate. The film crew spent 3 days at my property, interviewing me, filming the cemetery, and talking to Judge Harris, Margaret Chen, and some of the Meadowbrook residents. The documentary, titled Homeowners Association's The Hidden Government, premiered at a film festival the following year and was later picked up by a streaming service. My segment focused on how HOAs, originally created to maintain property values and provide basic services, had evolved into entities that could threaten fundamental rights like property ownership and family heritage. The film showed footage from the trial, interviewed legal experts about HOA power, and examined reform efforts in various states. The response was overwhelming. I received hundreds of messages from people sharing their own HOA horror stories. Some had lost their homes, others had been fined into bankruptcy. Many had simply endured years of harassment and intimidation. The common thread was a feeling of helplessness against organizations that seemed to operate above the law. Several state legislatures began considering HOA reform bills. Pennsylvania passed the Homeowner Protection Act, which established clearer oversight, required transparency in HOA operations, and created an appeals process for disputed fines and violations. The law also strengthened protections for historically significant properties and burial grounds. I testified before the state legislature in support of the bill, sitting at a long table in front of dozens of representatives and senators. I told them about my family cemetery, about Karen Caldwell and the fake documents, about nearly losing 200 years of history to a parking lot. HOAs serve a purpose, I said in my testimony, but they need oversight and accountability. What happened to me could happen to anyone. If my family cemetery had not had historical protection, if Judge Harris had not been willing to act immediately, my ancestors would be under asphalt right now. No amount of money or legal action could undo that desecration. We need laws that protect homeowners from abuses of power, whether that power comes from the government or from private organizations acting like mini-governments. The bill passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law the following month. Time moved forward. Seasons changed. The cemetery remained peaceful and protected. I grew older, more gray in my beard, more careful with my knees. But I walked among those graves every week, trimming grass, cleaning headstones, leaving flowers on birthdays and anniversaries. Jeremy and his family visited regularly. My granddaughters learned the names of their ancestors, the stories of who they were and how they lived. The 8-year-old, Sarah, developed an interest in history and genealogy. She started a school project about the cemetery, interviewing me and researching county records. Her presentation won a regional competition, and she was invited to speak at the County Historical Society. My younger granddaughter, Emma, was more interested in the land itself. She helped me in the garden, learned to identify different plants and trees, and adopted a very serious approach to caring for the apple orchard we had planted. She announced at age 7 that when she grew up, she wanted to be a farmer and take care of the land like I did. It's a hard life sometimes, I told her gently. Farming is not easy. But it's important, she said with the absolute certainty only a child can muster. You have to take care of the land so it can take care of you, and you have to protect the important places like the cemetery. Someone has to do it. Someone does, I agreed, and maybe that someone will be you. The Meadowbrook development eventually stabilized. Without the HOA's oppressive rules, it became a more diverse neighborhood. Some houses were painted colors other than beige. Some lawns featured gardens instead of perfect grass. A few residents put up fences or added sheds. It looked less like a planned community and more like an actual neighborhood where actual people lived. Daniel and Lisa Warner remained good friends and neighbors. Their children grew up playing on my property with permission, building forts in the woods and having picnics near the cemetery. I taught their son how to fish in the creek that ran through the back acres. Lisa helped me digitize old family documents and photographs, creating an archive that we donated copies of to the County Historical Society. Other Meadowbrook residents stopped by occasionally, usually to apologize for the HOA's actions or to express relief that the organization was gone. A few older residents admitted they had felt uncomfortable with Karen's aggressive tactics, but had not known how to oppose her. "She just had this way of making you feel like you were the problem," one woman told me. "If you questioned her, she would call you a troublemaker or threaten you with fines. It was easier to just go along." "That is how authoritarians work," I said. "They isolate people, make everyone afraid to speak up. When no one resists, they keep pushing further." "Well, you resisted," she said. "Thank you for that." 3 years after the incident, Judge William Harris retired from the bench. The county held a ceremony honoring his 40 years of service. In his retirement speech, he mentioned my family cemetery case as an example of why judges needed to be willing to act decisively when fundamental rights were threatened. "The law exists to protect people," he said, "not to create endless bureaucratic loops that prevent justice." When James Nolan called me that morning, I could have told him to file the proper motions and wait for a hearing. By the time the hearing happened, the damage would have been irreversible. Sometimes judges need to remember that we serve justice, not just procedure. I attended his retirement party and thanked him again for his intervention. "You saved my family's legacy, Bill." "Your father would have done the same for me," he repeated what he had said that day 3 years earlier. "Besides, I was not about to let some power-hungry HOA president destroy 200 years of history. The law was on your side. I just made sure it was enforced." We stayed in touch after his retirement. He and his wife visited the farm occasionally, and we traded stories about our children and grandchildren. He remained involved with the County Historical Society and continued advocating for preservation efforts. As for me, I found a kind of contentment I had not known before all this happened. The fight to protect the cemetery had reminded me why the land mattered, why history mattered, why standing up for what was right mattered even when it was difficult or dangerous. I started giving talks at schools and community groups about local history and the importance of preservation. I worked with the county to identify other at-risk historical sites. I joined the board of the Historical Society, following in my father's footsteps. The cemetery itself became a point of pride for Lancaster County. Genealogy groups visited to study the old headstones. Local historians included it in walking tours of historical sites. School groups came to learn about early American history and the importance of preserving heritage. I maintained the grounds meticulously. The iron fence was repaired and painted. The oak trees were professionally maintained to ensure they remained healthy. The grass was kept trimmed. Each headstone was carefully cleaned and preserved. I planted flowers around the perimeter, varieties that would have been common in the 19th century: roses, peonies, irises. Every Memorial Day, the county held a small ceremony at the cemetery. Veterans groups participated, since several of my ancestors had served in various American wars. The ceremony included reading the names of those buried there, placing flags on the graves of veterans, and a moment of silence. Standing there among my neighbors and community members, honoring my ancestors and preserving their memory, I felt the weight of what I had almost lost. If Karen Caldwell had succeeded, if those bulldozers had started paving, none of this would exist. The graves would have been destroyed or relocated. The history would have been scattered. The connection between my family and this land would have been severed. But it had not happened. I had resisted. Judge Harris had acted. The law, when properly enforced, had protected what needed protecting. And now, my family's legacy was secure for future generations. My father's grave remained the most frequently visited. I sat beside it often, updating him on family news, telling him about his great-granddaughters, discussing the state of the farm. Sometimes I just sat in silence, my hand on the cool granite, feeling connected across the boundary between life and death. "We did okay, Dad," I said during one of these visits. "The land is safe. The family is growing. The cemetery is protected. You can rest easy." A warm breeze moved through the oak trees, rustling the leaves. Birds sang in the branches. Somewhere in the distance, I heard my granddaughters laughing as they played in the yard. The sun filtered through the trees, dappling the headstones with light and shadow. This was what I had fought for. Not just the physical graves, though those were important, but the continuity, the connection, the sense that we were part of something larger than ourselves. My great-great-great-grandfather had cleared this land and built a home. His children and grandchildren had worked the soil, raised families, and been laid to rest in this quiet place. My father had protected it and passed it to me. Now I would protect it and pass it to my son, who would pass it to his daughters. The fight with the HOA had been traumatic and exhausting, but it had also been clarifying. It had reminded me what mattered most: family, history, land, legacy, the things that lasted, the things worth defending. Karen Caldwell had seen my property as an obstacle, an eyesore, something to be eliminated for the convenience of her planned community. She had not understood that some things cannot be measured in property values or community aesthetics. Some things are sacred, not in a purely religious sense, but in the sense that they connect us to something fundamental about who we are. The months and years after the trial brought more than just personal peace. The changes to Pennsylvania HOA law inspired similar reforms in other states. The documentary reached millions of viewers, sparking conversations about HOA power and accountability. Legal scholars wrote articles about the case, examining the intersection of property rights, historical preservation, and HOA authority. I received a letter from a family in Oregon who had been fighting their HOA over a similar issue involving a small family burial plot. They used my case as precedent in their legal battle and won. A man in Texas reached out to thank me for speaking up, saying my testimony before the Pennsylvania legislature had inspired him to run for his HOA board to reform it from within. These connections reminded me that standing up for what was right had ripple effects beyond what we could see or measure. Every time someone resisted an unjust rule, every time someone demanded accountability from those in power, it made it slightly easier for the next person to do the same. My story became a cautionary tale about HOA overreach, but also a hopeful story about community, law, and the power of individuals to protect what matters. It showed that even when facing seemingly insurmountable bureaucratic obstacles and fraudulent documents and powerful opponents, standing your ground and fighting for truth and justice could actually work. Not every story ends happily. I knew that. Many people who fought their HOAs lost their homes, their savings, or their sanity. Many families dealing with similar situations did not have a Judge Harris to call or the resources to fight a prolonged legal battle. The system had serious flaws that one victory could not fix, but my story offered a glimmer of hope that change was possible, that laws could be reformed, that abuses could be stopped. And sometimes that glimmer was enough to inspire others to keep fighting. As I walked back to the farmhouse after one of my cemetery visits, I looked at the land stretching around me. 10 acres, 8 of them undeveloped, 2 containing the house, outbuildings, and cemetery. It was not much compared to the massive Meadowbrook development surrounding it, but it was mine, genuinely mine, protected by law and defended by community. The house needed painting. The barn needed a new roof. There were always chores, always maintenance, but that was life. Taking care of what you had, preserving what mattered, passing something meaningful to the next generation. My granddaughter Sarah ran up to me as I approached the house. "Grandpa, I found an old bottle while digging in the garden. Mom says it might be from the 1800s. I examined the glass bottle she held. It was old, thick glass with bubbles trapped in it, probably from the 19th century when the original farmhouse was occupied. "That's a great find. We should clean it up and add it to the family collection." "Can I dig some more? There might be other things." "Sure, but be careful. Mark anything you find and we will research it together." She ran off, excited by her archaeological expedition. Lisa came out of the house with lemonade. I swear she's going to be a historian or an archaeologist. She is obsessed with old things. "She comes by it honestly," I said. "My father was the same way. always digging into family history, always preserving stories. It is a good obsession to have. Lisa handed me a glass. Keeps the past alive. That is what I fought for, keeping the past alive, making sure it has a place in the present. We sat on the porch, watching Sarah dig carefully in the garden, watching Emma climb an oak tree, watching Jeremy work on repairing a fence post. The scene was peaceful, domestic, ordinary, but it represented everything the HOA had tried to destroy. They had seen only obstacles and inconveniences. They had not seen the life here, the history, the connections between people and land and time. They had not understood that paving over a cemetery meant erasing not just graves, but stories, not just headstones, but identities. But I understood. My family understood. And now, thanks to the fight and the trial and the reforms that followed, more people understood. The sun began setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The oak trees cast long shadows across the cemetery. Birds settled in for the evening, their songs changing from daytime bustle to evening calm. The air cooled, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of grass and earth. This was home. This was heritage. This was worth protecting. And protected I had, with everything I had, against people who thought power and paperwork gave them the right to destroy what they did not understand. Karen Caldwell learned, in prison and through the public humiliation that followed, that some things cannot be bulldozed. Douglas Ventura learned that the law eventually catches up with those who abuse it. Tommy Breslin learned that easy money comes with a heavy price, and I learned that standing up for what matters, even when it feels impossible, even when you are facing dump trucks and bulldozers and fraudulent documents, is always worth it. Because some ground is sacred. Some history must be preserved. Some fights must be fought. The Nolan family cemetery stood that day, as it had stood for 200 years, as it would stand for generations to come. Protected by law, honored by community, defended by those who understood its value. And that made all the difference.